So welcome to this Technology Leaders Club interview following a recent dinner. I'm joined by Peter Pugh-Jones. Peter, can you tell me a bit about yourself and who you work for?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. I'm Pete Pugh-Jones, or just Pete. I work at Confluent. I look after customers' plans for success, right? So if they've invested in our technology, I like to go in and help the customers figure out how to make the most out of the technology they've invested in from us and ensure they get the value for money that they're looking for and the outcomes they want from working with a data streaming platform such as ours.
And we're speaking on the back of an event hosted yesterday as we record this. It was titled Breaking Batch, Data Streaming in the Modern Data Landscape. So can you explain perhaps why that title and why is the topic important?
Yeah, so for us, the topic's vital because we come from our heritage is Kafka. We can talk a bit more about that later. But something called Apache Kafka, which was originally built to forward messages around for at a company called LinkedIn, in fact, in its first guise. And then the founders of our company went off and created something that could be more democratized amongst the community and companies around the world that might want to take advantage of a very high volume technology like that. And the for us, the story is around, okay, so if you've put that technology in place, you've got data flowing through it, messages flowing through it all the time. Why would you not want to maybe stick your head in that stream and look at what's going on and try and make assessments and insights from the data in flight so that you don't have to wait till later to do it? So that's why it's called Breaking Batch, because the idea is to be really contentious and say, hey, what happens if we just threw out batch altogether and did it this way? We know that's not necessarily the way that people will go, but it's a really important sort of start point for a debate in that space.
The session itself looked at kind of three broad points. The first one was around like how can organizations effectively balance like legacy systems with innovation. So how did well, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the profile. We're obviously not going to mention names, but sort of the profile of the attendees, and how did they respond to that?
Yeah, so actually on the profile side, it was a really interesting and diverse group of folks from various different industries. Um, Probably slightly more on the financial services side in the room on the night, but all from different areas of financial services. And so I hope that they found it very useful to share their various different experiences and the directions and sort of the careers they'd had and the direction they'd taken to get there. All in very senior roles, usually with a vision set or a mindset around how to innovate. And in many of the cases in the room, they were part of transformation teams that were looking at existing technologies in the older businesses that they might have worked and what they could do to modernize and evolve away from that. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why they would want to talk to us, because that could be a technology they could leverage for all sorts of reasons to help them do it. So that was the general makeup of the room. And then I think the trending kind of conversations around the room were one of the challenges with the journey that Confluent has been on as a company, and that product that we talked about called Apache Kafka, the open source version, is that many people adopt it for a particular purpose and use it that way and architect it for that. And as we developed our conversations in the room yesterday evening, it became apparent that many of the folks in the room hadn't realized that there's all these additional things you can do around that sort of data streaming platform approach that I've already talked about, where you can start examining what's going on and maybe making decisions on the data as it's in flight. So that was the general trend of the conversation. I think it was folks interested in transformation, folks interested in maybe reducing complexity and having better outcomes with the data that they know is in their system somewhere, right?
Right, absolutely. And then, so thank you for that, the overview. And then next, you looked at sort of what approaches are effective for like I can't speak, future proofing architectures. So were there sort of popular approaches around that, or was this you mentioned a minute ago? People hadn't necessarily realised what was possible. So were there kind of clear ideas, or were you starting to sort of sow the seeds in their minds?
So I think maybe rather than common approaches, I'm sure that there are. What tended to come out more in the conversation I saw was everybody sort of fixated, quite rightly, I think, on the outcomes, the benefits, selling those benefits, and understanding how to position. So, in other words, translate the technology a layer into something that the business can actually understand the value from. So, effectively, starting with something small, saying, "Hey, here's a customer's paying for something at a cash point, a till, maybe it's a TV set or something. Wouldn't it be great if we could look at that in the moment, with their permission, of course, and maybe say, hey, instead of paying with your credit card with 22% interest, we could give you a pre-approved loan for 7% interest over 2 years or something. And though, popping it up on the app or something like that. And those were the kinds of, that's where people were thinking that would be the way that I could help pitch the benefits to my exec, right? And that was, I think, that was the common thing. They all saw outcomes as a way to sort of evolve away from what they currently have.
And did you find that there were sort of common approaches, or was it very much dependent on the organisation that was represented?
So I think because we had some folks in the room who'd come across our technologies before, and either our version or the open source variant, had already begun to experiment with some of these capabilities. That concept of maybe taking some code that you might write for analytics use cases down at the far end of the flow, in other words, on the data at rest, maybe in the reporting environment, um, and saying, well, actually, if I've had to build that thing multiple times, is there some other way I could create that, so I only have to build it once and then make it more reusable and shareable? And so some of the conversation there shifted towards, oh, so that might require us to think about organizational change as well, because yes, we have these tools, we may even have Confluent, but in order for us to take full advantage of that approach, might take some organizational shifting as well. And that really opened up the discussion around, okay, so how do we go about doing that? And actually, in the room, there was such a diverse group of folks, some from very large businesses, some from smaller ones. The conversation was actually fascinating, I thought, because it sort of demonstrated how, in each of those business types, different sizes of businesses, there could be a lot of different ways of helping the leadership who are setting the vision for the business or the strategy for the business, help them sort of see the outcome they could get in a small way to start with, and then build on it like a snowball, perhaps rolling down the hill.
Were there specific kind of like takeaways for the audience that or things they were going to go back and back to the office and think differently about on the back of the evening?
I think for the ones that hadn't really considered this idea of continuously evaluating data as it's in flight, I think there is, because a lot of folks, rather than use the word batch, which is of course what we're really describing, but the traditional way of working with data is to gather it all together, and when you think you're ready, then look at it, right? And what we're doing is almost turning that on its head. We're saying, well, take the code that you use to look at it while it's all stopped running and it's all finished and it's after it's happened, and actually lift that code up and shift it to the left, put it over here in the stream, and see if you can do that continuously. Could actually save you a lot of money, right? Because you're doing things all the time rather than in large lumps in the processing environments and so on. So I think a lot of them went off to think about how they could optimize and maybe not rip and replace what they already have, but maybe start to augment it with some of these approaches and see how that might over time help them future proof their systems. Because in the end, it is going to do that, because streaming, of course, or data streaming platforms can cater for both batch and streaming, which is the bit that most people don't realize until you go in and just sort of look at it in more detail.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. And were there? You mentioned some, sort of not surprises, but things that people hadn't realised through the conversation. Were there any sort of, was anything surprise you in the conversation, or did the delegates surprise themselves with some of the things they perhaps were thinking about or hadn't realised?
I think one of the conversations that I saw and observed everybody reacting to in a really sort of unexpected way was a person talking about buildings maintenance and building sort of IoT kind of scenarios, where they were looking to gather the data together and help use that data for environmental benefit, for people that own large portfolios of property around the world, and also for businesses rather than people, I should say, and at the same time find a way to optimize and reduce the cost of running lights overnight when there's nobody in the building and all that kind of stuff, and utilizing streaming for that was something that person was talking about, and the others in the room had like never even thought about that sort of opportunity with the same technology that they were using for things like credit risk analysis or fraud detection, right? So in a way, it helped, I think, people crystallize their thinking about all the newer things that maybe they didn't know from other industries that they could take advantage of.
Yeah. So perhaps inspiring each other and unexpectedly.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, and there was another one on the healthcare front, which I thought was fascinating, which was around, helping detect or even predict in advance using just our wearable devices, episodes that could be coming along that should make you go and check up, with your doctor or something, do a 360 check, those sorts of things. Again, really interesting sort of opportunities for, and then of course insurance people in the room were like, oh, that's a great idea. We could help reduce our risk and improve people's quality of life, right? So all of those sorts of ideas, I think, were fascinating. Yeah. Yeah.
And any other sort of thoughts on the event itself and the conversations, or any sort of conclusions that you drew as you left?
Well, so if anything, it would have been to have more time because there were so many subjects we couldn't really dig into too deeply. Clearly, obviously, there's always going to be someone's always going to talk about AI and generative AI and agentic AI, and there certainly was some conversations in that space. And we are, as a company, our tool sets are quite heavily utilized in that space to help with the hallucination type of challenges that those large language models tend to have, and also within the context of the questions you might ask a chat GTP type thing or something like that. And so there was lots we could have talked about in that space, and everybody was experimenting with AI in some shape or form in their business, but we hardly scratched the surface on all of their different areas. So yes, I would say that was another common theme that I would love us to have got a bit more detailed on. So
Peter, thank you for your time today.
thank you, Dominic. Great chatting. Thank you.